Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Unit 3 review video. So as per the Unit review videos, similar to the Unit 1 and Unit 2 videos, I will be reviewing the requirements of the Unit 3 essay, and I will be reviewing the Unit 3 chapter and our Top Hat textbook, as well as the drafting activities we have performed the class so far, as well as the materials you might want to further focus upon as the deadline nears for your essay. So to review the requirements for our essay. For the Unit 3 persuasive research essay, you are focusing on a controversial issue and writing a multi-sided argument while attempting to persuade a resistant or a highly skeptical audience with the intent of trying to persuade them to accept your stance on the issue. So a couple key terms here. You are choosing a controversial issue. I have already approved or not approved most of your controversial issues. So if I have not done so already, please contact me. In addition to choosing a controversial issue and taking a stance on that issue, you also need to choose an accompanying resistant or highly skeptical audience that you are going to attempt to appeal to. This resistant audience is going to have the opposite stance from which you believe in, and you are going to attempt to persuade them using common ground, meaning you're going to find sources and attempt to persuade them to believe your stance. And you are going to demonstrate within your essay that you acknowledge their beliefs, you understand their beliefs, and through that common ground, you are then going to transition over to promoting your own stance and attempt to persuade them. So at the top of your essay, I ask that you list your resistant audience. Otherwise, it makes it near impossible for me to grade your Unit 3 essays because I don't know who you're trying to persuade. I don't know to whose assumptions, values, and belief systems you are attempting to persuade. So please list your resistant audience at the top of your essay. As far as requirements, this is a persuasive research essay. For this essay, you need to use a minimum of 5 resources, and my requirement is that one of those resources needs to be one peer-reviewed article. So for example, a peer-reviewed scholarly article, an academic journal, a peer-reviewed credible scholarly article, 1 out of your 5 at least. So this essay will be about 5 to 7 double-spaced pages, so a full 5 pages minimum. If it is any less than 5 pages, especially for this essay specifically, it is very unlikely that you will have persuaded or attempted to persuade your resistant audience. So please try your best to hit that page count. I encourage that you use a delayed thesis structure as far as your organization for this essay, and I will cover that later in this review video, as this is the most effective organization when persuading a resistant audience. All right, main objectives for the persuasive research essay. Explore multiple perspectives of various stances of a controversial issue. Summarize a resistant audience's perspective on this issue. Provide that common ground between your stance and your resistant audience stance. So again, demonstrate that you understand their beliefs when you are appealing to them. Develop persuasive claims with your reasons, your warrants, your backing, with the kind of research and sources you're using. So are your sources credible? Again, integrate credible research sources, at least one peer-reviewed scholarly source, and consistently cite your research sources. If you do not include a works cited list, I may not pass your essay. And it is also plagiarism if you do not Include a works cited list, and if you do not use in-text citations. So again, direct and indirect attribution. I have so far within the course included a PowerPoint and a set of notes directing you to resources for citation, correct citation. So by now you should be using citation, so please do so. And then beware these common persuasive research essay weaknesses. So just make a note of these when you're drafting, what to look out for, and how to further improve upon these. So the writer chooses an issue or topic that is too controversial or too broad. This should not be a problem for most of you, as I have approved your topics. Some of you, I have told you that it is too narrow or too broad, and I have provided suggestions on how to narrow it or broaden it. But that is a choice, and then depending on the kind of research you find, you can shape your argument. The writer chooses an issue that is too controversial and therefore cannot find enough common ground to persuade your audience. So again, when choosing your controversial issue, again, this shouldn't be much of a problem because I approved your issues. But if when choosing your issue, if you find when you are arguing in favor of your stance on the issue, that you cannot find any form of agreement between your stance and your resistant audience's stance, then this is likely not going to be the most persuasive essay, because you cannot find that common point of agreement. And you're just not going to be the most credible writer and author to your resistant audience. The writer does not show understanding of your intended audience. So again, as I said, you have to show that you understand your resistant audience's belief systems, their assumptions, and common ground. The writer uses reasons, evidence, and claims that are not based on the values and interests of the resistant audience. So again, that common ground within your essay, within the kinds of sources you use, you should be dedicating at least a few paragraphs to your resistant audience's stance and showing why they support their own stance. So how to write or persuade to a skeptical or resistant audience. And this is an overview of what I just covered. So you need to use multi-sided argumentation, so concession, rebuttal strategy, summary of your resistant audience's perspective. Understand your audience's positions and belief systems. Consider research that counters your position, supports your audience's perspective, and supports your perspective. Shape your ethos to make you a trustworthy author and a sympathetic writer. And find moments of common ground. And then citing your sources. So this section refers to a reading log, which I did not have you guys complete in the course. Instead, I had you all perform an annotated bibliography so that you could summarize your sources and figure out whether they were credible. However, if you're having difficulty figuring out how to incorporate the sources in your essay or figuring out how to pair the sources with each other, look at these questions to help you figure out how to do so. So these questions help you understand how to make comparisons between your sources, how to understand where these sources that you found, the arguments within your sources, how they differ in their argumentation, how they differ in the kind of strategies they use. So for example, what would writer A, so source A, say to source B? Do they differ? Do they, would they probably agree? Do they say something completely different? If we look at number 3, to what extent does writer A and writer B disagree about facts and interpretations of facts? So do they present an article on the same issue? However, Do they present very different information? So that's a sign of disagreement and something you may want to look at as far as credibility. Which one is more credible? Do they have different stances on the same issue? Would one better support your resistant audience's stance, and would one support your stance? Analyzing your audience. So you guys also performed an audience analysis and a set of questions to help you further analyze your resistant audience. It always helps to visualize your audience as concretely as you can, just so when you're writing to them and attempt to persuade them, it does help you better find common ground. So you all answered these first 5 questions. However, I do suggest you look at the second set of questions under this heading audience analysis, as these help you think about your audience slightly more in depth. Just a quick series of questions. For example, what are readers' likely beliefs about my subject? What are the likely causes of these beliefs? So these are thinking about your resistant audience's assumptions and belief systems. How credible am I likely to appear to my readers? What are my readers' precise interests? So here they're getting very specific. Up here, further near the top, do my readers belong to any definable groups such as age, sex, race, a socioeconomic class, that's a big one, or educational class you may want to consider. So I highly suggest you look at these to help you further consider your resistant audience and how you might further appeal to them. Then logos, audience-based reasoning. You guys also performed an activity related to this, and I covered this in the PowerPoint in one of our Unit 3 PowerPoints, which I highly suggest you review. As this is a persuasive research essay, correct? So most of your argumentation is based on your logos, your reasoning, and your use of your resources from your research. So logos and how you use it is important in this essay. So just an example of how you might use your logos in relation to your resistant audience would be if your audience watched the film Joker and they came up with several reasons and assumptions for why they viewed the film negatively. So for example, they thought the Joker glorified violence. It focused on mental health and criminality, which is unethical. And they said they marketed it poorly. So there's 3 very different reasons for why these audience members thought that the Joker was a negative film. However, these 3 different audiences, as we see, hold 3 very different forms, 3 very different assumptions and beliefs about the film. So therefore, if you were to write a paper to one of these audiences, correct, you'd have to choose one, and based upon that audience, you'd have to choose one of these 3 reasons and assumptions to appeal to. You couldn't choose all 3, because based on that one audience, the kind of reasoning, kind of logos you choose to appeal to them with is going to be very different. So that's what you should consider when you are choosing your own resistant audience and attempting to appeal to them as well. And then as I'm scrolling past these are all activities for audience-based reasoning and assumptions. So if you would like further practice with working with claims, reasons, and warrants, so warrants are assumptions, I suggest you go to these. They're just short practice activities. And then claim types, which again, I covered all of these in a PowerPoint, but to review, there are 5 main claim types. These are definitional, resemblance, causal, evaluation, and proposal. So if you recall, I mentioned in one of the lectures that these claim types can be used within your essay as part of your rationale, so part of your reasoning. So an example of that is the resemblance claim type. So a resemblance is when you are making a comparison to something else, to a similar claim. So let's say, for instance, you are making an argument about something, about a certain issue. However, that issue doesn't have much information available about it. It doesn't have many resources available about that topic or issue. You might say, this issue is similar to issue B. So issue A is like issue B. Therefore, I'm going to argue that using the wide variety of resources that are available on issue B, we're going to use these resources to support issue A. So therefore, that student would be making a resemblance claim to support their argument. So that's an example of how you can use these claim types within your essay. Common ones you will see in student essays are definitional, resemblance, causal, and evaluation. We do encourage that students do not use proposal claim types. So someone should do this, your audience should or should not do this, because your audience is a resistant audience. They do not like being told what they should or should not believe in, or they should or should not do. So try to avoid using the word they should do this. And then again, here's some practice with the charts. If you pay attention to this chart down here, this one's especially helpful. So you could look at, for example, my main claim and reason is, and then if you cross over with the arrow here, this demonstrates how you might respond, how your audience might respond to your stance. So this arrow is saying how my skeptical reader may respond to my main claim and reason, and then you would do this vice versa. So this would help you think about how to format both sides of the argument within your essay. And then dialogical and invitational strategies. So dialogical is the term we use to describe having a dialogue with another person or with another argument, or think of it as another way of engaging in the conversation. So for example, as I have highlighted here, you may provide questions within your essay, enabling readers to respond and include themselves in the conversation. You can also think of these strategies as invitational, as you are inviting your readers to consider the issue with you and trying to find common ground with them. So basically, dialogical strategies are just non-threatening strategies. They're more open for a resistant audience, and it's easier to persuade a resistant audience with them because this conversational format of the essay, organization-wise, as your tone should still be fairly formal, it's just easier to persuade the resistant audience with. So if you read this essay above, so dear OU students, down below, this is an example of some strategies that the student used. So if you see, the student provided a buffer about the issue before they went directly into it to approach the controversial issue. The student used the delayed thesis strategy, so they put the delayed thesis at the end of the essay, so the 5th paragraph. Although there could be more than 5 paragraphs in your essay. They use pronouns such as we and our, emphasizing that the resistant audience and his stance, they were in it together and are approaching this issue together, and similar stances. And these are a summary of the strategies that the student uses. And then we are going to move into organizational strategies. Okay, so for this essay, as I have mentioned, you are going to use a dialogic argument, dialogic approach, and a delayed thesis. Meaning, no matter what, you are going to use a dialogic argument. And a dialogic argument is just, again, meaning you're going to demonstrate that you understand your resistant audience belief systems, you acknowledge their beliefs, and then you present your own belief system or your own stance once you have acknowledged their stance on the issue. We encourage that students use a delayed thesis approach, meaning you will state your thesis in your conclusion or near your conclusion. However, if you read the week 11 notes, I did mention that you can use a Rogerian approach. This still means that your delayed thesis will, you will still use a delayed thesis of a sort. Your thesis will not be in the intro. It will never be in the intro for the persuasive research essay. That is not encouraged. It is not the most persuasive strategy. So if we look at this structure as I have summarized, this is the difference between a Rogerian and a delayed thesis. And the only difference is basically within one paragraph. So the Rogerian approach versus delayed thesis, you'll see what I've highlighted. They both have an intro and a conclusion. And the delayed thesis, you have the dialogic discussion, and then you have the final paragraph with the delayed thesis right before the conclusion or in the conclusion. So the dialogic discussion is you going back and forth between your stance and the audience's stance. So for example, you would present a few stances on your resistant audience, or excuse me, a few paragraphs on your resistant audience's perspective, and then a few paragraphs on your perspective. And then you would present your final stance, what your belief is after reviewing these stances, both stances in the final paragraph. Whereas in the Rogerian approach, you would first present your audience's stance in a few paragraphs. Then, before presenting your stance, which is this contribution of new points in several paragraphs, you have a middle paragraph, which is that common ground paragraph where you acknowledge your audience's views, but then you present your thesis in this middle paragraph before moving on to your stance. And I'll show you an example of this in the student examples. So that is the only difference, where you present your thesis a little bit earlier in the essay versus later in the essay. Then we are going to scroll down. All right, so bathroom insecurity. Bathroom insecurity is an example of the Rogerian approach. So again, the Rogerian approach has that common ground paragraph where they present the thesis early. So as I've highlighted here, it's this brief transitional paragraph. So the writer states, I understand why one might feel that letting transgender people use the bathroom of their gender identity would create more problems than solutions. Nonetheless, I have to disagree with this stance. I believe transgender people should be able to use whichever bathroom they feel best reflects their gender identity. So after they present this common ground paragraph where they acknowledge the resistant audience's views, they present their thesis, they move on to presenting their main claims in support of their own stance. Whereas in the essay, should the US use needle exchange programs, this is a delayed thesis essay. You will see they do have a common ground paragraph also. However, needle exchange programs are used because they have benefits as well. So they do acknowledge the merits of the resistant audience's stance, and they move on to, they transition into their stance, but you see they don't present their thesis yet, but they do include that common ground paragraph. And then at the end, in their conclusion, they state their delayed thesis. So I believe that these programs are an important tool that should be used, and they say after acknowledging both sides of the argument. So I do really want you all to focus on the organization of the essay. That is probably one of the most important factors within your Unit 3 Persuasive Research essay. So highly encourage that you, again, focus on the organization of your essay. It will also help when you're incorporating your sources. It will help strengthen your essay as well. And then as always, if you have any questions or concerns, especially about the organization of your essay, if you're still a bit confused, refer back to the Unit 3 notes, and please send me an email.